Greetings and welcome to Halfling 13 Gaming. I'm finally finishing up my Dwarf Treasure Hunter Warband today with a pair of Dwarven Thunderbeards armed with crossbows. The only current henchmen of my band, these tough fellows are sturdy, good with a hand weapon, and wield a crossbow that can fire 36 inches whenever the engineer is involved in the battle. The models I'm using are two of the Dwarven Kingdom's sharpshooters, sculpted by the Beholder Miniatures and available on my mini factory, link in the description below. Both figures are printed in resin at 5 micron layer height and are designed as multi-pose models. Additional models will eventually be painted as the warband expands. In the painting process, I use the following paints and tools: matte black and Liquitex white ink for the zenithal primer coat, nomad flesh for the skin, dragon red for the shirts, matte white for the eyes, leather brown for the boots, straps, and pouches, oak brown for the crossbows, dark sky for the legging tabards, militia green for the cloaks, matte black for the base, some metal pre-coating, along with one of the beards, desert yellow for the second beard, rough iron for some of the decorative bits and highlighting on the crossbow, a Pigma Micron 3 marker for the eyes, charred bone for the crossbow strings and the arrows, uniform gray for the bases, plate mail metal for the arrow tips and a belt buckle, dark tone for the wash, and some twilight sky and army green for highlighting, along with some of the other colors. Since these models have not already been primed, began with another zenithal highlight, first with a layer of matte black, and then a top-down spray of Liquitex white ink for the shading. In the process, I added a bit more white from directly above to add brightness. As always, you can achieve similar with basic rattle cans, and I still have not seen much gain from the zenithal process. Starting from the inside and working out, I began with the skin tone using nomad flesh. With the beards and cloaks, there's only a few spots of open skin on these models. The next layer was the shirts, something I wanted to use the dragon red on. Completely coincidentally, as henchmen, they are the red shirts of the warband, but I actually just felt the red worked better here rather than on the lower tabard. With the shirts drying, I placed a couple of spots of matte white on the eyes. Next up was the leather brown, covering the boots, the various straps and wrist elements, and the belts and pouches. For the crossbows, I wanted some variation, so those were brown, but using oak brown for a darker shade. I ended up painting most of the metal pieces here as well, but came back later to correct that. For the lower clothing, I opted for a blue this time and used dark sky. As a henchman, I felt they didn't really qualify for fancier clothing. This worked well with the reds. For the cloaks, I initially thought of grays, but then decided a foresty camouflage made more sense and opted for militia green. It was at this point that the pair of dwarves started looking more like garden gnomes, less like warriors, unfortunately. I used a bit of matte black to pre-coat for the silver metals and clean up the crossbows a bit, and filled in one of the beards. For the second beard, I used desert yellow for a dirty blonde hair color. Each of the dwarfs needs some rough iron, so I added a touch to the belt and did a bit more cleanup on the metal pieces of the crossbow. That allowed a nice contrast between the wood and metal parts. Shifting over to the Pigma Micron 3 marker, I touched the pupils of the eyes. If you haven't tried this technique, quite happy with it, and the markers are inexpensive. Crossbow strings and arrows were looking a bit plain, so I touched each of them with some charred bone. The arrows were more of a soft dry brush since they really didn't stand out much in the sculpt. The typical coating of uniform gray was next applied to the bases to fill in the flagstones. And then I touched a few pieces of plate mail metal on the model, the belt buckle on one dwarf, and a small amount on each of the crossbows, along with the sword on one of the models. With the base coating done, I applied a layer of dark tone to both models, covering all surfaces, and then gave it plenty of time to dry. Once the wash was cured, the models were looking much more consistent, though needed a bit of highlighting. I touched up a couple of points of plate mail metal, mainly the tips of the arrows, to make them shine a bit. A few touches of nomad flesh were applied to the high points of the arms and faces. For the pants, I did a highlight in the inner line with the dark sky. The cloaks had quite a bit of surface to highlight, so I added a bit of militia green back to the coloring. I then moved back to the pants and did a second highlight, this time with twilight sky to accent the lines. The iron had dulled down due to the wash, so I did a light dry brush of true copper on the textures of the crossbow. Since the cloaks had so much area, I returned to them as well and did a second highlight, this time using a lighter shade of army green. Finally, I painted the routine layer of matte black around the rim of the base, and the Dwarf and Thunderbeards were finished. I like how both figures turned out. This process gave me a chance to do some additional highlighting and try additional blending in shades, something that ended up quite nice on the cloaks. My earlier concern of Guarded Gnome didn't fully go away, but at least they looked like dangerous dwarves at the same time. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this content, leave a like or subscribe to the channel for more content. We post battle reports where these models will likely make an appearance. If you have any hints, tricks, or techniques to leave a comment. I'm willing to experiment a bit, especially on some non-Legion models. I'd also be curious to see your efforts in painting for either this unit or others.